Today's American military is a woke shambles that prioritizes DEI and social experimentation over war fighting. Fortunately, Donald Trump is now president, and Pete Hegseth is now Secretary of Defense. Hegseth is a proven warrior who promised to strip woke out of the military and refocus it on its core mission of killing America's enemies and destroying their stuff. I expect great things from Pete Hegseth. That said, there are other experienced and well-informed warfighters who've made some excellent suggestions for Secretary Hegseth to consider. I've never served in the military myself, but these folks who have served seem to have some pretty good ideas. And one of these is my friend and fellow lawyer, Kurt Schlichter, who's also a retired US Army Infantry Colonel and combat veteran. Kurt recently posted a list of his top 10 to-dos for the Secretary's consideration, and I thought they were great. Kurt has kindly given me his permission to share his suggestions with all of you in the law of self-defense community, and that's exactly what we'll dive into right now. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Now, again, I want to make clear that the list of top 10 to-do items for fixing America's military that I'm sharing with you are not my creation. They are the product of the intellect and experience of retired U.S. Army Infantry Colonel Kurt Schlichter, who also happens to be a career lawyer practicing out of California. Kurt's also, by the way, the author of many excellent books, including the explicitly pro-American Kelly Turnbull fictional novels, as well as many excellent nonfiction works. I'll provide links to those in the description, and I urge you to take a look. By the way, Kurt posted his to-do list on X, and I urge you to follow him on that platform. I'll post a link to his top 10 to-do list in the description so you can find them there. Now, again, I've never served, so for military context, Colonel Schlichter, retired, served in Desert Storm, Kosovo, and the Los Angeles riots. He began his career as a private first class and received his commission through the Army Officer Candidate School. He was a commander of a cavalry squadron and deputy commander and acting commander of an infantry brigade combat team. He also holds a Master's of Strategic Studies degree from the United States Army War College. So that's the background and experience context for Kurt's top 10 to-do items for Secretary Hegseth's consideration. Before I dive in, I do want to make something completely transparent. So today's show involves both sharing Kurt's to-do suggestions as well as my own thoughts on those. For clarity, when I'm quoting from Kurt, I'll post a graphic display showing his quote on the screen, and then expand with my own commentary. Kurt ought not be held responsible for what I say. With that note made, I'll dive right in. To-do item number 1, fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, replace him with a killer. You can't change an organization if you don't change its head. Now, for context, you can think of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as kind of a serving officer CEO of the overall military, invariably, of course, a high-ranking general, and they serve as the main point of liaison between the civilian commander-in-chief, now President Trump, and the civilian Secretary of Defense, now Pete Hegseth, between them and the larger serving military. Now, I personally don't know anything about the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I don't know if he's doing a good job or not, whether he's personally woke or not, and I don't care. He must be fired. No matter how capable or well-intentioned he may be, no matter how personally likable or professionally admirable, he must be fired. He has to be fired for the same reason that a capable, well-intentioned, likable, admirable CEO must be fired if they have been overseeing a company that's been going badly off the rails. First, the CEO and this chairman must, in any case, be held responsible for the performance of their company or the military. Second, even if everything going wrong was not their fault, they still have to go, because you can't change the trajectory of a giant organization like a company or military if you retain the same captain in charge of the ship. There's simply too much personal and professional inertia built into that leadership. And inertia inhibits changing trajectory. A new CEO or chairman brings in a cascade of other new leadership in all subordinate levels of management or command. It makes explicit that the status quo is over and big changes are about to occur. It also makes crystal clear that if the big boss's job is not necessarily secure, neither is anybody else's. Heads will be collected as necessary to meet the needs of the service. And that's demonstrably true if you're an officer, a flag officer, or even the most senior general. It's been said of Napoleon, probably incorrectly, that he once noted that it's helpful from time to fire the occasional general, if only to encourage the others. Firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs serves that purpose, even if the chairman is utterly without fault. And really, there's no view of the current woke state of the U.S. military in which the chairman could be found without fault. To-do item number 2. Instruct that climate change shall never again be labeled a strategic threat. Our threat is enemy nations and groups, not the weather in a century. Now, speaking for myself, I've often noted that the notion of catastrophic anthropogenic climate change has always been a financial grift, political power grab, and cult religion. But even if I were wrong on every bit of that, and I'm not, that still wouldn't change the fact that the core mission of the U.S. military is not to fight some amorphous, eventual climate change. It is to kill America's enemies who would seek to harm our citizens and interests and to destroy their stuff. In recent years, the strategic imperative of climate change has been just another woke lever to diminish the war-making capability of our military. As just one example, many U.S. Navy vessels today look like rusting Soviet-era hulks because climate concerns have complicated the availability of the paints needed to keep our ships in what used to be called ship-shape condition. Not only does this kind of thing certainly diminish actual physical fighting capabilities and reliability of billion-dollar assets, it can only degrade moral and fighting spirit. Nobody wants to live in a crappy house, not even sailors. To-do item number 3. Instruct that every attack option briefed to POTUS, President Trump, will include significant degradation of enemy military capabilities. No more messages or signals. Diplomats send messages. If we hit, it hurts and makes the enemy less capable. Folks, this 1,000 times over. The analogy I would use is simply a traditional, functional, nuclear family authority structure. In almost every circumstance, mom's authority is sufficient to keep the kids in line. But kids being kids, every once in a while they overstep, and mom is obliged to call in the big guns. Wait until your father gets home. And things get chill real quick. Why? Because everybody knows that if dad is called in, shit's about to get real. There will be consequences, and you will not like them. It should be the same with our military. The mommy diplomatic service should be our go-to for settling disputes and disagreements with other nations and factions, if only because war is both costly and wasteful. But hanging over those cocktail party conversations and video conference calls has to be the big stick. The always present threat of wait until your father gets home. And those nations and factions need to have absolute certainty that if dad military is brought into the conversation, there will be consequences and you will not like them. People may die. Shit will certainly get broken. Shit you care about. Because we'll make sure that the shit we break is shit you care about. We've all seen dysfunctional families in which there's a lack of that father authority figure, either through absence or paternal fecklessness, and no rational person would want their nation and their nation's military to share that degree of dysfunctionality. Dad's back, kids, and that's the way it ought to be. To-do item number 4. Tell the UK we're keeping Diego Garcia. They can work backwards from that end state. Now, I don't know much about Diego Garcia. I know it's an island in the Indian Ocean. I know it's technically British territory. I know the U.S. maintains Navy and Air Force bases there. And I presume from Kurt's to-do that there's some discussion with the UK about the future status of Diego Garcia and presumably then our ability to continue to base military assets there. My take on Diego Garcia is the same as to any other similarly situated asset around the world. If it is important to America's national interest and security, we keep it. Indeed, if we don't yet have it, we take it. And as Kurt says, everyone else, all the other stakeholders, whoever they may be, can work backwards from that end state. The U.S. is willing to come to reasonable accommodations. Fees can be paid, blah, blah, blah. But we are not willing to compromise national interest and security. And we're not conceding to playing on some kind of fake level playing field. To continue my previous nuclear family analogy, America is the dad in the house. Nobody else. Certainly not anybody literally incapable of presenting as an existential threat to the United States. So whether it's Diego Garcia or the Panama Canal or Greenland or whatever, we are keeping or taking it as we see fit, and everyone else can work backwards from that end state. To do item number 5. Create an unofficial advisor cell to collect and report outrages, guidance violations, and other antics by bureaucrats and resistance hacks out in the field. Select targets to make examples of that will encourage compliance with the new commander's intent. Resistance must be quickly and unequivocally crushed. Folks, woke must be treated as a metastatic social cancer. Right now, it's spread throughout America's military body, and because we've allowed that spread, we have a lot of work ahead of us. But just like with biological cancer, even a single surviving woke cell, if left undealt with, can give rise to a total resurgence of the cancer all over again. The woke infesting our military must be torn out to its very last vestige and utterly eradicated. And the only way to ensure this has actually been accomplished is to have observant eyes spread throughout the military, ready to spot and report any resurgence so that it can be swiftly dealt with. This also has the benefit of discouraging the merely wishy-washy from sliding into the woke ideology pushed by the more politically aggressive. Remember, woke more often advances less by large strides than it does by boiling the frog. Boiling the frog must not be permitted. I want to give you a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. We translate all the legalese into plain English so you can make better informed, more confident, more legally sound, and more decisive decisions in defense of what you value most. And perhaps best of all, most people tell us they can read the entire book in less than an afternoon. Check the book out on Amazon where it's 5-star rated, but don't buy it there. They'll charge you $25 for the book, plus shipping and handling. Order the book from us, and we only ask that you cover the cost of shipping the book to you. The book itself is free. Grab your free copy of The Law of Self-Defense Principles right now at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. To do item number 6. No more vague grounds for relief, meaning relief from command. Instead, when an officer is relieved, it will not be for a generic loss of command confidence, but for specific wrongdoing. Set a clear standard, particularly that orders given will be carried out, and enforce that standard. My thoughts. The current practice of relieving officers for vague and ambiguous reasons is bad on several fronts. First, it fails to hold those failed officers from being held strictly accountable for their professional failure. I would also suggest that officers to be relieved have a right to know precisely what they've done wrong, much the same as a defendant has a right to know precisely the criminal charge brought against them. Second, and much more important than any consideration for the relieved officer, is that shame is a superpower. Shame, in as specific and detailed a form as possible, serves to inform and caution every other officer who might be tempted to make similar missteps, as did the officer who was relieved. This strengthens the quality of the officer corps generally and creates an environment in which a failure to perform not only carries a threat of negative consequences, but is almost physically repugnant to think of. Much as I previously mentioned, a key reason to offer specific grounds for relief and to do so publicly is to encourage the others in better managing their commands. I would also note that a bonus option here would be to require that any officer relieved of command for cause is also reduced to the last rank they performed competently. I expect that risk of reduction in rank may be one of the most powerful motivators of professional performance in the officer corps. To do item number 7. Launch surprise Secretary of Defense visits to military facilities. Start with walkthroughs of troop housing with the Senior Installation NCO. If conditions do not meet the standard, see number 6 above, Relief for Cause. This supports recruiting and retention while reorienting the officer corps towards basic troop care. The basic rule? Officer facilities had better not be in better shape than troop quarters. Now, as I said at the start, I've never served. That said, I've read a great deal of military history. Much of that reading has been around the Marine fighting in the Korean War, particularly around the Chosin Reservoir, under the command of Chesty Puller, wherever you may now be, Chesty. A consistent theme throughout those readings has been the priority placed on ensuring the combat troops were as well fed and cared for as the chaotic circumstances allowed. Not infrequently to the point that the officers did not serve themselves food until their combat troops had all been served. Now, this may well be an idealized state. I'm sure those of you who served as enlisted have your own personal experience to share on this point of officers. But I think it's an idealized state worth promoting as Kurt promotes that value here. To do item number 8. Fire every service academy and war college superintendent. Direct that non-STEM professors will be terminated and replaced with serving or retired officers. Call in reservists as well. The rule, if it does not help students be better leader of killers, it's gone. Require briefing by the new superintendents on the revised curricula that corresponds to the Commander-in-Chief's intent on warfighting and DEI no later than 15 February 2025. So here we see Kurt applying the same fundamental management principle as in the firing of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You can't get substantive change in the trajectory of as massive an entity as the U.S. military or any of the service academies unless you fire the old boss and bring in a new boss. Kurt is here also appropriately advocating cutting out what is surely an enormous quantity of fat from the service academies, staff and programs that are poorly or not at all related to the core mission of warfighting. Kurt also wisely asserts a date certain for changes to be made. If there's no deadline, stuff never happens. Have a deadline. To do item number 9. Refuse to tolerate the, sir, we can't, because regulations dodge. An order implies the task of identifying and executing the means of changing rules and regulations that purport to block the order. The job of a subordinate is to find a way, not to find an excuse. Again, see number 6 about being relieved for cause. Now, there are really 2 problems that need to be addressed here. One that's passive, which is what Kurt seems to be addressing explicitly, and one that's malicious. In any organization that's been allowed to get weighed down with regulations, it has to be expected that everyone operating in that organization will feel hamstrung by those regulations. After all, every time they've tried to find a way around them, somebody in authority has come around and smacked their knuckles with a ruler, or much worse. These people have been conditioned, like Pavlov's dogs, to treat the regulations as the highest value in their day-to-day operations. But regulations are not to be the highest value in the military. The highest value of the U.S. military is its warfighting capability and its ability to kill America's enemies and break the enemy's stuff. Any regulation that interferes with the core mission must be discarded with prejudice. More sinister than that passive concern, however, is a problem that's common and we just saw arise recently again, and that is what's called malicious compliance with regulations or orders. This occurred recently with the announcement that the Air Force would discontinue teaching about the famous African-American Tuskegee Airmen of World War II in order, they claimed, to be in compliance with the new anti-DEI mandate being rolled out by Secretary Hegseth. Not surprisingly, the political outcry was immediate. The teaching of history has, of course, nothing to do with the toxic recruitment and promotion today of current personnel based on race, gender, sexual orientation, or any factor other than their ability to facilitate the core military mission of maximum warfighting capability. This announcement from the Air Force was merely a political hit job on Hegseth and anti-DEI initiatives, a form of malicious compliance that in the military context can only be understood as explicit acts of insubordination. Hegseth quickly reversed this decision on the teaching of the Tuskegee Airman history, but I've not heard that any person in particular has been fired or demoted as a consequence of this obvious malicious compliance and insubordination. As I mentioned earlier, unless there are substantial consequences for this kind of thing, unless the kids know that dad can be called in, nothing substantive will change. Secretary Hegseth does neither himself nor America any favors if he allows the military to be run like a single mother home. To-do list number 10. Relieve any commander and the CNO, Chief of Naval Operations, if there is a spot of rust on a U.S. Navy ship after 15 February 2025. Anyone claiming that we can't have a professional-looking ship because of safety and environmental rules is referred to-do list number 9 and number 6. Now, this one I really spoke to earlier when I covered Kurt's number 2 about climate change. And Kurt has a special bonus item for us. No more mil-speak, staff hack jargon. Jargon is always a means to disguise confusion or to exclude outside input that challenges the status quo. Simple, clear English is the standard. Now again, folks, I've never served, but I see this kind of jargon talk being very common in the civilian world when I run across wildly over-credentialed but undereducated graduates of the woke brainwashing universities and colleges. These people aren't genuinely able to properly think. And so, of course, they're not able to properly communicate their woke, broken mental processes. So instead of speaking in a straightforward, plain English manner, they speak in a barrage of meaningless jargon and polysyllabic blathering that communicates little or even negative useful information. It's almost akin to someone unable to speak a foreign language simply shouting English at increasing volumes at the foreigner in the expectation this will make them understood. The purpose of this jargon and mil-speak is to hide the fact that these people are not actually thinking, that they're instead functioning as kind of a retarded automaton, a kind of human wind-up or pull-string doll that just kind of shakes in place and utters repeated phrases. For reasons already discussed, lack of competency and inability to think must not be permitted to hide behind mil-speak and jargon. It must be exposed as the nonsense it is and eradicated. If it can't be said simply, it's almost certainly just nonsense that does not advance the military's core mission of warfighting. And finally, we have Kurt's last bit of advice here to Hegseth. Come in hard. You can always let up when the organization has earned a lighter hand. And I could not agree more. All right, folks, I'll close out today's show by reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun. So I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. Then you also owe it to yourself and your family to know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca at lawofselfdefense.com. Stay safe.